In the frozen expanse of the northern wilderness, where the tundra stretched endlessly and the nights seemed eternal, the few who lived had no choice but to be resilient. It was the 14th century, and the icy lands of what would one day be Alaska were home to scattered native colonies. The villagers of Krev'lik were among the most isolated, their survival dependent on their unity, skill in hunting, and reverence for the spirits of the land. But even their traditions and resilience could not protect them from what had come. At first, the signs were subtle, hunters failing to return, strange tracks in the snow, and an oppressive silence that settled over the forests at night. Then came the attacks, swift and brutal. Shadowy beasts with glowing eyes and razor-sharp claws began to raid the village, slaughtering livestock and dragging away villagers. Desperate for aid, the people of Krev'lik sent messengers to neighboring settlements, but no one would come. None dared venture into the cursed woods, where the beasts were said to be spirits of the damned, creatures of nightmare born from ancient blasphemies. It was during one such attack, under the flickering light of the aurora borealis, that a stranger arrived. The man was unlike any the villagers had seen. He was tall and broad, clad in battered steel armor, his cloak lined with wolf fur. He carried a long sword on his back, its blade etched with intricate runes, and a shield marked with the symbol of a winged cross. He introduced himself as Sir Roderick of Avalon, a knight of an ancient order devoted to hunting evil. Though his once noble appearance was weathered by time and hardship, his eyes burned with determination. The villagers were hesitant to trust him. He was an outsider, a man from across the sea, speaking of lands they had only heard of in whispers. But when he joined them in repelling the beasts that night, cutting through the creatures with a precision and strength that bordered on supernatural, they saw him as a savior. Roderick listened as the elders described the horrors that had befallen them. They spoke of creatures that came with the storms, beasts that seemed to vanish with the dawn. They believed these monsters were summoned by a malevolent spirit known as Krev'lik, a great shadow said to dwell in the mountains to the west. Whatever their nature, Roderick said, they bleed, and so they can be killed. Show me the path to these mountains. Roderick set out the next morning, accompanied by two brave villagers, Amarik, a young hunter with a sharp eye and steady hand, and Nanook, a seasoned tracker who knew the land better than anyone. Together, they followed the beasts' tracks westward, their breath misting in the freezing air. The journey was grueling. The snow fell endlessly, and the cold bit through even the thickest furs. They crossed frozen rivers and treacherous ice fields, the landscape growing more hostile with every step. As they ventured deeper into the wilderness, the tracks became more numerous. They found the remains of other settlements, their huts burned, their inhabitants torn apart. Roderick's resolve only hardened. "It is as I feared," he said one night as they camped in the shadow of a glacier. "These creatures are not mere beasts. They are Krev'lik, demons born of hate and malice. They feast on fear and grow stronger with every soul they consume." Amarik and Nanook exchanged uneasy glances, but they did not falter. They had seen enough to know that Roderick spoke the truth. On the 5th day, they reached the base of the mountain where Krev'lik was said to dwell. The storm that had been gathering all day unleashed its fury as they climbed, snow and ice lashing at them like a living thing. Roderick led the way, his sword drawn, the runes on its blade glowing faintly in the darkness. The wind howled like a chorus of wailing spirits, and the shadows seemed to writhe and twist around them. At the summit, they found the source of the evil. A massive black monolith jutted from the ground, its surface covered in ancient carvings that seemed to shift and shimmer when looked at directly. Surrounding it was a circle of bones and charred remains, the air thick with the stench of death. And there, standing before the monolith, was Krev'lik. The spirit was a towering figure of darkness, its form constantly shifting as if made of smoke and shadow. Its eyes burned like coals, and its voice was a low, guttural rumble that seemed to resonate within the very earth. "You dare challenge me, mortal," it hissed, its voice carrying over the storm. "I challenge all who would harm the innocent," Roderick replied, his voice steady. "Your reign of terror ends here." Krev'lik laughed, a sound that made the air itself vibrate. With a wave of its hand, it summoned a horde of beasts, dozens of the creatures that had been terrorizing the land. They emerged from the shadows, their eyes glowing, their claws glinting like daggers. Amarik and Nanook fought bravely, their spears and arrows finding their marks. But the beasts were relentless, and soon the two villagers were overwhelmed. Roderick stood alone. The knight fought with the fury of a man who knew he would not see another dawn. His sword flashed in the storm, cutting through the beasts as if they were made of smoke. But for every creature he slew, another took its place. The snowstorm intensified, the wind howling like a banshee. Roderick's armor was dented and bloodied, his movements growing slower with each passing moment. "You cannot win," Krev'lik taunted, its voice a cruel whisper in the wind. "Your strength is failing. Your light is fading. You are alone." "I am never alone," Roderick replied, his voice firm despite the pain. "For I carry the light of those I protect, and the faith of those who believe in good." With a roar, he charged the monolith. The beasts swarmed around him, but he cut them down with a ferocity that bordered on madness. Krev'lik shrieked in fury, its form growing larger as it tried to block his path. Roderick reached the monolith and plunged his sword into its base. The runes on the blade flared to life, casting a blinding light that cut through the storm. Krev'lik screamed, its form dissolving into the air as the monolith cracked and shattered. The beasts fell lifeless around him, their bodies turning to ash. The storm began to subside, the wind dying down to a whisper. Roderick collapsed to his knees, his strength spent. He looked to the sky, where the aurora borealis danced in vibrant colors. It was Christmas Eve, and for the first time in months, the land was at peace. The villagers of Krev'lik found him the next day, slumped against the remains of the monolith. He was gravely wounded but alive, his sword still glowing faintly in his hand. They carried him back to the village, where he was tended to with care and reverence. Though his wounds never fully healed, Roderick lived long enough to see the village flourish again. He became a legend among the people, a symbol of courage and selflessness. When he passed, they buried him on a hill overlooking the village, his sword placed at his side. And though centuries would pass, the story of the last night of the north of the man who faced the darkness and held it at bay would endure, whispered by firesides and written in the stars.